You're a fine boy, a fine boy. Come here and give me a kiss.
Oh my goodness. Welcome back everybody to the Book Versus, and hey, look at that, we have our first viewer request video. So it looks like Forrest over here's requested we take a look at the classic book Pinocchio, or The Adventures of Pinocchio if you want to get all fancy about it. So everybody's probably seen at least one adaptation of this story, written way back in 1883. It actually started as a newspaper serial, and as like all public domain classic stories like this, has been relentlessly remade over and over again. So then, as usual, which one is considered to be the best version? Well, according to the internet, it's the 1931 edition starring... It's the 2022 Guillermo del Toro edition. Yeah, I'm actually kind of surprised it wasn't the classic Disney's 1940s one. But according to the internet, the 2022 one is just a little bit better than that. So that's one we are going to be looking at. This is actually kind of exciting because we actually have a brand new movie we're going to be checking out, not someone made back in the 30s or 70s or whatever. Speaking of the 70s though, so you probably noticed in the thumbnail there's actually a three-way battle this time. Well, that's because Forrest went on to mention that among all the various Pinocchio adaptations, the 1978 one, there's the 70s again, is actually the most accurate to the original source material. So just for kicks, I'm going to look into it too, see how it goes. Now the thing is, after I looked into it, I realized that there actually were two Pinocchio movies released in the year 1978, a live action one and an animated one. I wasn't sure which one Forrest meant, and I suppose the simple thing to do would just to have asked Forrest which one, but where's the fun in that? So a little bit of research into it, it appears that the animated one was actually done in Italy in 1972, and it was dubbed for English-speaking audiences in 1978, meaning that the live action one was the one that was actually technically released in 78. So that must mean they mean that one then.
Stop that! Stop it! You stop it!
I think I'll take my chances with the animated one. So here we are then. We have the OG original book, the faithful cartoon adaptation, and the modern stop motion animation one. Which one is the best? Well, there's only one way to find out, and that's first to move on to... So since there's three of them this time, I'm going to go over each of the different visual medias one at a time when compared with the book. So keeping that in mind then, we're going to move on with the animated one first. So yes, like Forrest went and said, the 78 cartoon is very faithful to the original material. It follows all the dialogue perfectly verbatim all the way through. There are some minor changes here and there, such as instead of it being a cat and a fox, now it's a cat and a wolf. They kind of washed over about how Geppetto got the lumber or the wood that he used to make Pinocchio in the first place. It's all just kind of like nitpicky little odds and ends right here. As usual, of course, they couldn't fit the entire book into just simply a 90-minute cartoon movie. So they kind of got around this by giving like a storybook style narration through it. This is a perfectly acceptable way to tell the story. I had no problems with this. I was kind of annoyed though about how they skipped certain parts, especially this one part where Pinocchio goes to court and is then sent to jail, right? Because he was robbed. So in order to stand that, you have to kind of look at the author here, Carlo Collodi. I probably butchered the pronunciation of that. Or Carlo Lorenzi. I also probably butchered the pronunciation of that. So like I've already once said, he initially wrote Pinocchio as a weekly serial in a newspaper that he worked for. And so beyond just simply having a story about how, kids should study hard and work hard, he also went on to do political satire, and not just about politics, but also about the judicial system, the case system, and so on. Now, mind you, the only reason why I'm even aware of a lot of this is because the edition I have right here, which is the Penguin Classic Edition, actually has a fairly lengthy intro kind of breaking a lot of it down, plus an extensive index in the back. So whenever something's going on, it doesn't make sense. The index is there to save the day and kind of explain what's happening. So as an example, why is the judge a gorilla who's wearing gold-rimmed glasses that have no lenses in them because his eyes hurt, and then even though Pinocchio is robbed, he's the one that gets sent to jail? The cartoon took all that stuff out, right? And I didn't realize why until like halfway through the movie. I realized, oh wait, hold on, it's because they wanted to take out all that like political satire and all that stuff out and concentrate strictly on the idea of being a good little boy, for the kids. So for the purpose of this book versus, I'm going to assume then that all the satire they put in for adults is filler. I don't think it's filler, but for the purpose, I will say it's filler. So they took all that stuff out, that's fine, right? But there still was one more scene in the book that they removed from the cartoon, which I was annoyed by. Alright, so Pinocchio is walking along, he wanders into town, the guy is starving, he wants food really bad. He's seeing the town, everybody is hard at work, being productive and everything. Pinocchio walks up, to a woman drawing water out of a well, asks, can I have a drink? They strike conversation. She eventually bribes him with enough food. They're like, okay, fine, I'll help you out. That does happen in the book, but before that happens, as Pinocchio initially enters into the city, He's thinking to himself, I'm hungry, I want some food. So he starts to beg people for money. All he's asking for is just 1 coin. And he goes up to somebody and says, hey, please, can you please give me 1 coin? I'm starving. And they would say, I'll tell you what, I'll give you 4 or 5 coins if you help me do this chore, such as helping me pull a wagon. Pinocchio turns all of them down because he just refuses to work. He doesn't want to work. Why should he have to work? He just wants to play and eat. So it wasn't until eventually he got hungry enough that he then broke down with the woman at the well. Adding that 1 or 2 extra little conversations added only a couple extra minutes in the movie. And I felt it added a lot more to that scene in general. But they took it out, so that's kind of disappointing. Now, one other thing to remember too is that this is, of course, an Italian film, all right? And I think it's probably a lowish, budgetish Italian film, so the animation's sometimes a little...
I'm drowning!
Mind you, it's not like it affects the story really at all, but even the dubbing here and there is, a little bit sketchy.
And so Pinocchio, after having saved Alidoro, returned to the sea and began to swim in the direction of a cave.
And would have really hurt you guys to translate it, a couple of the signs.
That sign can't stop me because I can't read.
All in all, this is just nitpicking once again, right? It doesn't actually affect the actual story in any way. And like I was already saying, if you don't care about everything, you just want the core concept or idea of being a good little boy and working hard in a video format, then yeah, the 78 cartoon is definitely the way to go. So now moving on to the 2022 version. This is a lot more of a reimagining the original story, right? Now, I could go on for a long time comparing the book to this new movie, but so this video doesn't run on for a super long time. I'm going to keep it brief. I'm only going to try and bring up a couple things here. First off, pushing the story ahead by a few decades, bringing it to around to the 1930s. Now you get the army and the war breaking out and all that. It was definitely an interesting idea. And then they bring in the Spaz the monkey. They greatly expanded the idea of the blue fairies. And so while it isn't reimagining, there still are a spattering of original ideas and concepts in the book, such as Geppetto getting worried and going out to look for Pinocchio, eventually getting swallowed by the giant sea monster. Pinocchio, of course, wanted to be a good boy, but always getting distracted very easily. And surprisingly, there's still jabs at the political landscape, such as, the way how they portray Mussolini, or about Geppetto's frustration about the law, and you have to follow the law. The thing is, though, while the book follows exclusively from Pinocchio's perspective all the way through, aside from the very beginning before he's created, the movie jumps around a lot more. You have all these sub-characters and sub-stories going on, trying to build up this world overall. Sometimes it does make Pinocchio kind of feel like he's just a plot device to kind of push everybody else's story arcs along. So instead of exclusively concentrating on being a good boy, you get other stories that are kind of similar to it, but kind of take it in a little bit different directions here and there. This does certainly make it a fuller story. The book, I'll admit, actually, in a way, becomes kind of repetitive. It's almost the same thing. Pinocchio's going out to do something, he sees something, he knows that this is what I'm supposed to do, the good thing, or I could do this, and he chooses to do the bad thing. Rinse and repeat, just in different ways. I guess the 2022 version does this, sort of, but it now has multiple players, I guess I'll say. One other thing I'm going to mention about the movie is, in the book, nobody seems to care that they have this walking, talking, living puppet walking around. Everybody just accepts it as it is. In the movie, everybody's freaking out, what's going on? What is this? So, I get it, the book is a bit more fantastical. Not to say that the movie isn't, but the book even more so. There's a lot more talking animals and things in it. The movie is, by comparison, more grounded in reality, sorta. All these things give the movie a dramatically different feel when compared to the book. But before I get into too much detail about that aspect of it all, I first have to talk about... Alright, so in the book, Pinocchio is a jerk. He's a total jerk. He talks, he brags, he gloats about he doesn't want to work, he doesn't want to listen to anybody, he just wants to do whatever he does, and not in a silly, cute, no, he is a straight up brat jerk all the way through the story until basically the very end. Every video adaptation ever seen of Pinocchio always has him far more innocent. Even if you look at the 78 cartoon one, right, which is identical basically to the book. Just the way how the voice actor does the work and the animation, he still comes off as being a lot more cute and innocent when compared to the book.
The only profession I want to learn is eating and drinking and sleeping from morning to night.
I kind of liked him being a jerk. Why can't he be a jerk? Just make him a jerk. It's just in both of them. He's so innocent. And the 2022 one, he does have a little bit more of an edge to him. He'll snap back every now and again. But I find that's not so much his character, but just because of the type of circumstances surrounding him now when compared to the book. So it's kind of forcing that a little bit more. That over him just simply being a brat. In the book, his way of thinking gets him killed. Yeah, he dies in the book. Well, sorta. So remember how I originally mentioned about how Pinocchio started off as a newspaper serial? Well, the original story was supposed to be the fox and the cat, right? They're trying to rob Pinocchio, and when they're trying to get the money from him, they end up hanging him from a tree, right? To try to end his life, as it were. Pinocchio just refused to give him his money, so he's hanging in the tree, and he dies. Dead as a doorpost, they say. He's gone. It was only because there's like this big outpouring of mail to the newspaper he was working for, asking, requesting, demanding that he continue on with the story. People liked the story Pinocchio, this puppet. They wanted to see everything turn out good for him in the end. So Carlo here brought him back and resurrected him he was resurrected. So that way he was then eventually able to give the puppet the happy ending that everybody wanted him to have. Turning into a real boy. This did make the original book a bit jarring, I'll tell you that, but it does make it an interesting read at the same time. And then finally, of course, there's no mention about him turning into a real boy in the 2022 one at all, aside from, he's now mortal. That's another interesting take on things, so I'll talk about that a little bit later here. Another thing I will kind of give to the 2022 one is, alright, I'm referring to the book, right? At the very end of the book, the fox and the cat, they're destitute, they're impaired in every way you can possibly imagine, and they reach out in desperation to Pinocchio, please, can you help us, can you do anything for us? And at this point, Pinocchio is supposed to be the good boy and all this, right? He just tells them to take a hike and abandons them right there. And I'll tell you, this actually really kind of bothered me when I was reading about it and looking at it in the 78 one. How many times was Pinocchio forgiven in this story? How many times was he given extra chances and all these gifts and people are helping him? Well, apparently with all the lessons Pinocchio learned, forgiving, forgetting, showing sympathy or pity to others who have may wronged you in the past wasn't one of them. The 2022 version Pinocchio, he's pushed around by a couple people. Oh, would you look at that? They talked it out. They expressed themselves. They're now together and stronger and better than ever. Turns out letting go of past animosities might be a good thing. The one last thing I want to mention about Pinocchio is in the book, every single bad thing that happens to him is directly due to something that he did, right? So he's facing his own consequences based on his own actions. In the movie, I found that more often than not, he's being forced into situations, whether he wants to or not. You can take that how you want to take it, but I thought I'd still mention that anyway. Geppetto. So he's basically identical in the book to the 78 version. However, there's one thing I'm going to drama mom a little bit about, and that is how they did, like I already mentioned, skip the part where he initially gets the lumber to build Pinocchio. There's like this little blurb between him and this other guy, and it was really good. I really enjoyed it. They were getting into fist fights and they're cursing each other and they're fighting and it was just a ridiculous situation. Like I remember when I was reading, I was telling my IRL friends, like, man, the book is basically like Trailer Park Boys because Geppetto is essentially Ricky as far as I was concerned.
Look, I need some stuff. I could rob you or you could just give it to me.
Sadly, that was all removed and what do we get? Surprise, surprise, cool-headed, hard-working old man Geppetto. Anyway, so the 2022 version, Geppetto, he is noticeably different. So now he's a widower, I guess. They don't really seem to talk about the mother that much in it. He lost his own son, Carlos. Wait a second. Carlos. So he's lonely, and in a drunken stupor, he makes a puppet, Pinocchio. So I guess he's Leahy now.
Julian!
His character is much more complex now, struggling with loneliness and his station in life. He does loosely follow his book counterpart, like I've already mentioned. He goes out looking for Pinocchio, getting swallowed by the fish. And I will say, even having just a brief montage of him looking for Pinocchio added a lot to him, so you can kind of see like the struggles he's going through. All that's kind of washed away in the book for the most part. I liked it overall. In the book, he was for the most part just a device to encourage Pinocchio to be a good boy and so forth. In the movie, like I said, he actually directly contributes to the plot a lot more, which is good stuff. The fox and the cat were identical from the book to the 78 version. There was a little bit of censorship involved, but not a whole lot to talk about. And as far as I could tell, they didn't seem to be represented in any way in the 2022 version, so I guess I'll just move on. The Puppet Master, he's obviously really expanded a lot. In the book, he has like one scene where he looks like he's going to, burn Pinocchio, but then he just kind of lets him go. Obviously, they took this idea and just, like, once again, expanded a lot in the 2022 one. Fairies. So the blue fairy, well, because there's only the one in the book, she basically becomes Pinocchio's mother in it at the end, sorta. Right? In the 2022 one, they kind of got rid of that whole aspect of it. They made it abundantly clear that they're just be considered to be, like, powerful, mythological creatures. This does make more sense to me, since in the book, she's like, I'll be your mother, I'll be your mother. Then at the end of the book, she just kind of disappears, so thanks, Ma. Lampwick's dad, he did not exist in any capacity in the book whatsoever. He's brand new. Lampwick himself, though, I have a fair amount to say about that guy. Before I do that, we're going to have to move on to... Actually, before we get to Lampwick, alright, so the progression in the 78 cartoon, it is spot on. It flows well, the narration tells you everything you need to know, and unlike the original book, they had the luxury of knowing the entire story already, so it was a lot more like seamless, I'd say, when compared to the book. And despite my grumbling about, the quality sometimes, it was pretty fun to see some of the scenes from the book fully animated and voice acted and everything.
Well, what is it?
Tell me, do you feel well?
Me? Yes, I feel wonderful.
But are you really sure?
Of course. Why should I tell you one thing if I mean another?
Well, in that case, I'd like to know why you're wearing that silly thing in your head.
Well, you see, it's like this. The doctor thought I ought to wear it because I hurt my knee.
It is overall a lot more lighthearted and fun when compared to the book, but that is, I guess, acceptable considering they wanted to concentrate on the children's aspect of the entire thing. Not to say adults can't watch it. Like, of course they can watch it, right? But I'd rather adults just read the book so they can get the social commentary. But mind you, unless you're an expert on 1880s Italy, you're not going to understand it anyway, so unless you want to study it up. The 2022 one, it did move a bit faster overall. Like I said, there's a lot more mini stories going on and happening. You do have to pay a fair amount of attention when you're watching it, or else there's a pretty respectable chance you're going to miss something, something important to the story, and you're going to be a little bit lost later on. I'm not saying you got to be taking notes or anything like that, but you have to actually watch it if you're going to watch it. Feel though, Alright, so the original book is about Pinocchio struggling to be a good boy so he can turn into a real boy, right? Spoiler again, but he does not turn into a real flesh and blood boy in the 22 one. He does become mortal, but he's still a puppet. He's just made of wood. He's a boy, wooden puppet at the end. And I'd say the reason why that is because in the movie, the 2022 one, Pinocchio is only half of the main character. Just half. Yes, I understand he has the most screen time of all the other characters, but hear me out for a second. As far as I am concerned, as I was watching, Lampwick was actually a hidden main character, alright? And here's what I mean when I say that. As far as I'm concerned, Lampwick's story in the 2022 movie is a slight against the original book. So the book preaches very heavily on the idea of, as a kid, or boy, girl, whatever, you have to work hard, you gotta study hard, you gotta listen to your parents and your elders and learn from them if you want to be successful or anything in life. Well, what did Lampwick do? He studied hard, he worked hard, he listened to his parents, or rather his father. I don't even think his mother had any speaking lines in the movie, but his father, he listened to him, did everything the father told him to do. And what happened at the end of it all? He was miserable, and his father was annoyed and disappointed in him. The one time Lampwick seemed to grow as a person was when he and Pinocchio, they're fighting that little skirmish, and then they decide to have a tie on it. And, they shake hands or whatever. You can see Lampwick is elated and happy and excited for the first time in the movie. And what did his father do? That's right, he was angry and upset at what Lampwick did. He then demanded that Lampwick do something that he just simply didn't want to do, as in shoot Pinocchio. Now, mind you, at this point in the movie, Pinocchio was still immortal. If Lampwick did shoot him, Pinocchio would just have resurrected after such and such a period of time. But at this point, Pinocchio was his friend. Lampwick didn't want to do it. He was then refusing a direct order or what have you from his father, something that goes against what the original book is talking about. And let's face it, I'm sorry, but unfortunately, almost everybody can think of, a couple or a few parents who, when you look at them, you kind of hope that their kids turn out better than that they did in, various circumstances.
Get over here!
Get the hell out of my trailer with that gun!
Sorry, Ricky.
It's okay, Train. It's not your fault. Go get Daddy a t-shirt from Ray.
I shot my daddy in the bum, and Mommy's gonna get mad at me. He's fine.
Lampwick finally standing up to his father and telling him that he's not a soldier, he doesn't want to be a soldier. When all his dad seemed to care about was making sure that he would go off and fight the enemy, forcing his child then to be something that his child isn't. Even Geppetto was guilty of this, crying out in the movie, why can't you just be like Carlos? Be like Carlos, my son, be like Carlos. It's just that, unlike Lampwick, Pinocchio dug his heels in and be like, I'm not Carlos, I am Pinocchio. So then, as far as I'm concerned, Pinocchio and Lampwick are basically the same two characters in the same situation. Two fathers forcing them to be something that they're not. A soldier, a lost son. It's just that Lampwick, while he did the best to appease his father, Pinocchio refused to do so. In the end, Geppetto accepted Pinocchio for who he was. He wasn't a replacement for his lost son Carlos. He was Pinocchio, his new son, a puppet made of wood, and he accepted that. So there's no need for Pinocchio then to change into a real boy since he's accepted as he already was. And then you have Lampwick's dad who just simply refused to accept Lampwick for what he was, and unfortunately he lost his life to it. This is the one part of the 2022 movie that actually really bothered me a lot, and that is not knowing what happened to Lampwick at the end of the movie. He apparently survives the bombing raid, or the attack, whatever you want to call it, but then we never see or hear of him again. And I sat through the credits waiting to see maybe they'll say something like, no, that's it. So it's just Did he survive the war? Like, what happened? I was kind of shaking my head at that. It was disappointing since his character adds so much weight to the overall story, I found. The book pushed the idea of change yourself for the better, while the movie pushed the idea of be yourself, but be the best version you can be of yourself. No bodily transformations needed. So finally, all that then being said and done, which of the three is actually the best? So this may come as a bit of a surprise, but I'd argue that all three do have their play. If you're an adult, then yeah, read the book. If your kid's a brat, then make him watch like the 78 version. Or if you're one of those adults that just simply refuses to read for whatever reason, then yeah, look at the 78 cartoon. It's there. I'll give you a very good idea of what the book is like. Just picture Pinocchio being a bit more... And then if you want a modern take on this story, then the 22 one is there for you, for sure. But I have to choose at least one being the best of the three. And if I'm going to be honest with myself, as you could probably tell with the way I've been talking about it, then yes, the 2022 Guillermo del Toro one is actually the best of the three. It has great animation, it's wonderful reinterpretation, modernizing all the right things, it's adding its own subtle social points, taking into account more people than just Pinocchio. It's all very well done. So when you have a chance, give it a watch. Or read the book. The book's still great stuff. Thanks for watching. Meanwhile, a gusty north wind had gotten up, blowing and howling with rage. It slammed the poor hanged puppet here and there, making him swing violently, like the clapper of a bell ringing in celebration. The swinging was causing him to have stabbing pains, and the noose getting tighter and tighter around his throat was preventing him from breathing. Little by little, his eyes grew foggy, and although he felt death approaching, still he was hoping that from one moment to the next, some compassionate soul would pass by and help him. But after waiting and waiting, when he saw that no one, absolutely no one, appeared, at that point, close to death, he remembered his poor dad and stammered, "Oh, Dad, if only you were here." And he didn't have the breath to say more. He closed his eyes, opened his mouth, stiffened his legs, gave a big shudder, and remained there as if completely rigid.